we were texting each other pictures of our dates.
Is it recording? Because you can have the picture up there and not be recording anything good.
Make me second guess myself, Scott. I don't have any help here. I don't have any help here. Malachi, man. Malachi has been my saving grace here. All right. We are ready to go, and appreciate everyone changing days. I had to go up to Seattle tomorrow, so I text Beth at like 8 this morning and said, well, we could postpone or we could try to do it tonight. And so, yeah, appreciate everyone just jumping on. There's no school, so I didn't even know if I was picturing like one person showing up, and so this is great. I appreciate it. I did not want to have to miss, but that being said, I also just found out we were doing this at 10, and so I've been throwing the slides together and trying to figure out what we're doing for 4 or 5 hours since then. So
well, thank you.
They might not be that polished, so we will get going. But this is, I guess, the last gasp before we get into the darker side of Revelation. I mean, I still, as we talked about many times, I think the most important part of the book of Revelation is the 7 letters, 7 churches. I think that pertains to us. I think there's direct messages, and I think there's also admonitions that you should know and understand what's going on in the 7 letters, 7 churches. But then there's this kind of an interlude where John's getting his first glimpse of the throne room of God and the setup to the 7 seals, and it's another uplifting portion before we get into the catastrophe that is the Great Tribulation. So we talked last week about the vision of the throne room of God, and this week we get into the idea of redemption as we see the title deed to the earth. And I have a title dead, which that's just ironic. So a Freudian misspelling. So we will do a very, very quick review and summary because I don't think there's a lot we need to cover from last week or the prior weeks in order to get into this one. And then I'm going to switch up the order. We decided, I think, as a group to do our chapter each week and then sort of add in like a secondary concept or like a something that's helpful to know as we start moving into the upcoming concepts. And so instead of doing that after we do our chapter, I want to do a quick summary of the Book of Ruth, because I don't think you can understand chapter 5 of Revelation unless you understand what's going on in the Book of Ruth. And it's not just a poetic love story as it's commonly taught in a lot of seminaries. And even in secular schools, the Book of Ruth is taught as an example of Hebrew poetry and as if it's really that simple. But I think it's one of the most important books, especially in the Old Testament for Christians. Oh, we know that. Welcome. We grabbed a couple chairs for you, but so I think getting in and understanding what's going on in the Book of Ruth, and this is going to be the hardest part because I could probably go 4 or 5 hours on the Book of Ruth alone, and it's going to be an attempt at doing that in 20 to 25 minutes, which sets the scene for chapter 5. And like I said, I think a lot of the teaching on chapter 5 is misguided because people don't understand the concepts that are behind the Book of Ruth, and I think a lot of the teaching on the Book of Ruth is probably the most skewed in the entire Bible. And so I think it's very important for Christians, especially if you master one concept in the Old Testament. I think it should be the Book of Ruth. And so I want to just go back to that. We did a full study on it, I think like a year ago. And so if you want to go back and look at that, but I think we can cover most of the same material relatively quickly because I think we have mostly familiar faces. And then chapter 5 is the title deed to the earth and the concept of redemption in Revelation. So this is the culmination of everything. This scene that's given in signs is effectively the beginning of the end. It's the kickoff of the Great Tribulation and God's fulfillment through Christ of all the promises, the glory to come, and the catastrophes that will happen on earth. And so we're probably going to get through 12 verses today in that concept, but I think it's important enough to spend an entire week on it. Since we have no new people, I will include this but not go through it. And just as a reminder, this is the only book of the Bible that has a promise blessing for those who read and hear the words. And we talked about it last week, about the concept of keeping those things. And I think, it was you, Deborah, wasn't it? Yeah, that said, I wonder if it's something similar to like a holding. And so I was looking up some of the Greek origin to it, and then going back to a Hebrew reference. And the concept of keeping here is exactly as you anticipated. It's not like keep as in adhere to, it's keep as in hold dear, like hold close. Or so to have and to keep, as in the marriage, is the same words used in the marriage ceremony. You're not keeping your wife in that case, you are having and keeping, you are holding near and dear. And so the concept here isn't necessarily a promised blessing for those who hear the words of this prophecy and obey them. It's who hear them, and I'll call it treasure. And I think that was a really good insight. I think if nothing else comes of this study, I love like getting to learn some of those things, because that same word will also come up in 3 different places as we get through Revelation, and understanding that he's not calling you to obey, he's calling you to treasure, to digest, to keep them near to your heart. So that was cool. I thought that was a worthwhile sidebar. So to review where we are and how we got here, the book of Revelation, as we've gone through many times, has its own outline. We started with this idea where Christ instructs John to write the things which you have seen, the things which are, and the things which will take place after this. At the time he says that, the things he had seen, he had already been given the vision of Christ. That was in the past in the text. The thing that he had seen was the vision of Christ. The things which are is the 7 churches, or the 7 letters to 7 churches. And John was instructed to write those, but he was penning letters from Christ to the churches, and not just the churches of those age, but we went through hours and hours of how each of those applies to every church and every Christian, and we are admonished to know and understand those messages. But once that is completed, there seems to be this ending of that. There's an after this. After the time of the church, after the period of the 7 letters, we step into this period that's called the Great Tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, Daniel's 70th week. You'll see several different references, but it is the final 3.5 years that entails the judgment of Christ for an unbelieving and Christ-rejecting world. And we see the setup to this, that John is taken into, he was in the Spirit on the day of the Lord. And so we went through several different classes on what it means to be, what the day of the Lord refers to. And in my view, it is both near and far. The day of the Lord is a singular and specific day. That is the day that Christ returns and sets foot on the earth, but it is also used emblematically to mean this entire period of human history from the rapture and through the onset of the millennial reign of Christ, where he comes back, and it's this final period of biblical prophecy and I guess just a general era that's referred to probably 80 different times. I think I had the number a couple weeks ago, 80 to 86 different times throughout the Bible in different formats of the day of the Lord, the time of the Lord. So very singular and specific, but at the same time referring to this whole period. So we've been marching our way through the timeline, and where we ended up last week was not much in terms of the timeline, but it nails down what John is seeing here. The vision that John is given is a vision that starts after the church is gone, because we see already at the beginning of John's vision the 7 lampstands and the 7 flames that are the 7 spirits of God in heaven and before the throne of God. We see the 24 elders that are representative of the entire priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, the priesthood of Christ, as opposed to the Levitical priesthood. And so that each of those, which I believe beyond doubt represents the church, are already in heaven. And so it puts us in this period post-rapture. And as we see the Antichrist coming onto the scene, the rise of his power, the abomination that causes desolation, the coming judgments in the book of Revelation gives us multiple views. We start seeing what's going on in heaven, and then we see corresponding what's happening on earth. So we'll learn to partition those aside, and the biggest determination is if you see the elder teaching, an elder showed me, It is things that's going on in heaven. Those are specific to the view and the vision of heaven. When you see the living creature or an angel telling him, it's the view of what's going on earth. So it's almost like he has two different guides that show him this litany of events, and we'll start moving through those relatively quickly. But this week we get our last sight on I guess last positive note before it starts getting really negative for a while. But one of the things we focused on more than anything last week as we saw the throne room of God is the correlation between the throne room of God and the description of the tabernacle. The tabernacle was a model that was meant to teach what the throne room of God was about. Not just what it looked like, but what each of the pieces of furniture, each of the attributes, from the coverings on the wall to each piece of furniture, to the metals that they were made out of, to the dimensions, every single one of them points to Christ. And you can spend your entire life studying nothing but the tabernacle and not learn all there is to know about Christ. It is unbelievable and one of my favorite studies in the Bible, but as you see and get familiar with the tabernacle, as you really study that, then you read this description in Daniel and Ezekiel, in Revelation, of the throne room of God, and they start feeling very familiar. It starts feeling very comfortable, as if you can picture what the tabernacle looks like. You got a pretty good idea of what the throne room of God looks like in the signs that John was given. I don't necessarily know that that's exactly what the throne room of God looks like, but it says that Christ rendered it into signs so that John would understand and be able to convey to us what's going on. So the first thing John sees is a door to heaven. Do I believe there is an actual door to heaven? No, I don't think you have to walk through a physical door to get into heaven. I believe Christ says, I am the door. There is one way to heaven, right? And he has laid claim to that. And so when John sees there is one door, he is seeing what Christ said. I am the way. Anyone who comes in any other means is a thief and a robber. There is one means of getting into heaven, and it is Christ. And so each one of these things that we saw in the throne room of God just keeps hammering home over and over and over. It is Christ on the throne. It is Christ in judgment. It is Christ who reigns. It is Christ who rules. And everything from the colors that surround him to the songs that are sung, to the four living creatures, each of them points very specifically to Christ himself. Not God the Father, not the Holy Spirit. Each are mentioned in different capacities, but the focal point of all of it is Christ. One of the things I've been trying to ask afterwards, or sometimes I get to chat with people, but things that I didn't make clear, or things that I mentioned that didn't come across as clear in the last one. And the biggest one that I got two different questions on. We mentioned there were four living creatures that were covered with eyes, right? It was covered with eyes and had wings going different directions and such, but we didn't really talk about, I kind of threw out there that my view of eyes is that eyes are symbolic of either righteousness or the Spirit. And so when it says that these four living creatures are covered in eyes, I see that as they're covered in the Spirit. They are full of the Spirit, as we would say it, for a lot of different reasons. One of them being in Revelation 1, we see 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. In 3 different occasions in Revelations alone, we see this, which are the 7 spirits of God. And each time they either deal with burning fire or eyes. And then Christ, when he describes, he says, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is dark, how great is that darkness? And so there just seems to be a correlation between righteousness or the Spirit and eyes. And so I think it's symbolic of that righteousness that he's pointing to. No, I don't think Christ is saying literally your eyes can be good or evil. I think what he's saying is that is generally the thing, the feature, the mode by which we go astray. The eyes are deceitful. And so then you'll start hearing things like hearing is of the Word of God, and seeing throughout the whole Bible ends up usually pointing to evil, but hearing ends up pointing to good. So most of the time when you hear someone saying, I heard but then seeing ends up being sort of an indication of going astray. So I think this light, or this being full of eyes, or the 7 spirits, or the 7 eyes are the righteousness or the Spirit. And we get this idea of the 7-fold Spirit of God is from Isaiah 11:1. It gives us this a prophecy of Christ, that he will be filled with the Spirit, a shoot will come out from the stump of Jesse, from his root, and that's where we get the root of David. That's where we get the name. The root of David is from Isaiah 11:1. A branch which will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of understanding, the Spirit of counsel, the Spirit of might, the Spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. And so that's this sevenfold Spirit that I'm not sure if those are specific attributes or if that's just meant to indicate the whole. But throughout the Old Testament, you'll see various references to the sevenfold Spirit of God, or the seven spirits, or the sevens of Spirit. And generally it's a reference back to this Isaiah 11:1, that there seems to be 7 attributes of the Spirit of God. And so that's, to me, that's something we can fully dig into in like 3 or 4 other sections, but we definitely don't have time to really develop here. But I encourage you, if that's something that's like a stumbling block when you see the eyes and such, just to get a concordance and get out eyes. Like, just go into the eyes and see everywhere eyes are mentioned. And it's not that one can be dispositive, that this is the answer, but you do start getting a feel for a lot of these things. And eyes is a difficult one for me because I don't know that it's clear. You see a lot of times that eyes are referenced to like all seeing or all omniscient. Many other times you see the eyes are affiliated with righteousness, and then other times it's lack of righteousness comes through the eyes. And so I'd commend that to your study, because it's definitely something I'm not strong on, or I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. But that's kind of how we got into it last week. I wanted to throw this out here because we talk a lot about different, this is a total digression, but we talk a lot about different versions of the Bible and the value of having an accurate version of the Bible. I just, like, while we were working outside and playing around on Sunday, we went to one church service, and then I just listened to 2 or 3 other local ones of other churches just to hear what people are talking about. And I heard an entire service on the Romans securing the tomb of Christ. Like, the whole theme of this sermon was around how, like, the Romans tried to secure Christ but couldn't keep him in the grave. And it was like sort of a metaphor and stuff like that, and they used this verse, and it really stood out to me as just a really good example of just not having a good version of the Bible. I believe, I said a couple weeks ago, I think I am excited because I believe I will see Pilate in heaven. I believe we will see Pilate in heaven. I believe Pilate was saved. I believe there's enough to indicate that he knew who he was and that he feared him. And whether that goes to the next level, there's some other extra biblical writings that seem to indicate some really, really interesting things. But even just what's in the text, talked about when Pilate writes the script, he says with his own hand, he writes the script that's posted above the cross. And in Hebrew, from right to left, he writes the Yeshua Hanavir, and the first letter of each of the words is an acrostic that spells out YHVH, which is the unpronounceable name of God. That's how it's spelled in the Hebrew, YHVH, which is why we have the debate of Jehovah or Yahweh. And the Jews, in case we were to miss it, came and they said, no, don't write that he is the King of the Jews. Write that he says he is, because they understood that this is an acrostic. And that's very big in Hebrew culture. And so Pilate knew what he was doing, and when he responds, what I have written, I have written. And so he writes this with his own hands. His wife warns him that she saw in a dream to have nothing to do with this man. And so Pilate had within his power to put him to death, that he could have, without question, without anything. When he says he washes his hands of it, that he's still bound by certain rules. He is not responsible. So what he's doing is saying, you're allowed to, you can pass it off to the Sanhedrin and the church to allow them to do it. But he was going to have nothing to do with it. And so a lot of people make a big deal out of Pilate was responsible. They make a big deal out of the Jews being Christ killers. This person or that person's responsible. If you're looking for someone to blame for the crucifixion, blame me. Like, I'm responsible for putting Christ on the cross. Not the Jews, not Pilate, no more than I am. And any time you hear someone preaching or taking a position that someone has lost favor because of their role in the crucifixion, which is a big argument behind the replacement theology, that the Jews have lost favor because they rejected the Messiah and were responsible for the crucifixion. And that requires that God was surprised, which I don't believe. This was part of the plan, and it was on my behalf, not because of things they have done. But what I heard, an entire sermon, I know those people. You walked away. Okay, sorry. Let's see. So we heard this entire sermon that was just based around this like proof text where grab some other things here and there, but trying to make this idea that the Roman, and I like was trying to see through it to what he was getting at, but I kind of just got distracted so bad by the bad interpretation. But the NIV of Matthew 27:62, I think, says, the next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate and said, Sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise again. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he had been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate responds, take the guard. Pilate answered, go make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting a guard. So this ends up being this whole, litany behind everything that was an entire Easter service. And if you read the King James Version, which, going back to any language you're choosing, is far more accurate to the substance and far more accurate letter to letter, Pilate said to them, you have a guard. Go your way, make it as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing with a stone and setting their guard. And so the whole concept that the Romans, there was a whole thing about the Romans putting a seal on something meant that if it was broken, then it was a death sentence, and that the Roman guard would normally be 16 people in a legion, and it was just kind of like this litany, and it's just based on using a bad version of the Bible. I mean, the NIV is fine if you're in middle school studying. If you're getting into serious, like, what is the text, what does it say, what does it mean, I highly recommend getting away from the NIV. Call it the nearly inspired version. But the idea here is there's cynicism. Pilate says, you have a guard. Like, he wasn't posting a guard. These weren't Roman centurions at the tomb. He tells the Pharisees, you have a guard, you go make it as secure as you know how. I believe he says this cynically. I think he knows this guy is coming out in 3 days. Go make it as secure as you think you possibly can. And it's a huge difference. That is the message behind that is, and that's just based on the version of the Bible you use and trying to be true to the text versus someone's interpretation of the concept. Spring birds. You're glowing.
Excuse me, I didn't catch the passage. Do you know the...
Did I not put it on there? I think it's Matthew 27.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry if I didn't put it on there.
Matthew 21?
21?
Is it 21?
We can find out. Mo, will you get your Google Docs out and look at that? That one.
I'll tell you what, if you type in part of the text,
Yeah.
Google will tell you what the reference is.
Okay, so we got several people looking it up here. We'll get that one for you, Becky. Sorry, I should put that on here. Okay, so that was totally a sidetrack, and I'm sorry that it was really interesting to me, and I think we've talked so many times about the value of being disciplined in word for word study and what is the actual text, not what was some group's interpretation. And I just thought that was a really good illustration. Not that it defeats the meaning of the service. I mean, obviously the whole point was, he's risen, and that's the common theme of all Easter services. And I don't mean to say it's
Matthew 27:62.
yeah. Okay, thank you. So, total digression. So now, in one of my favorite studies possible, there is, I believe, understanding the Book of Ruth is imperative, and I've said that several times, and this isn't the first time we've studied it, so I'm going to try to do this in a summary way, but know that there is so much more here that we could go into, and I highly recommend getting into a detailed verse by verse study of the Book of Ruth, and I would love to do that sometime, but it feels like it's forever away if we do any structure of going through the Bible. So, yeah. We talked about this concept of the law of redemption about 2 or 3, I think right at the beginning of Revelation. We did an introduction study, and there is a concept, the entire law in Israel, the legal system is built on this concept of 6 days of servitude, 6 periods, 6 years of debt, 6 years of prison, 6 years of, there is no police system in Israel. You'll notice there's no jails in Israel. There is this familial enforcement that each tribe enforces violations against their own tribe, and the priesthood administers, the priesthood acts as judges, but all of it is based around the Levitical system, that their laws are not codified in statutes. Their laws are the Bible. That is why they call it the law. It's so much more than just the 10 Commandments. We think of the law of Moses as being the 10 Commandments and the Mishnah and the various interpretations of that. But their law was so much deeper, and the penalty for violation was death. And there are a few exceptions to that, but you are safe to assume if there is a violation of the law, the penalty is death. There was no jail system. You were put to death for blasphemy. You were put to death for violating the Mosaic law in any number of 1,000 ways that you can't even possibly. So we can fault the Jews in a lot of ways, but they were absolutely zealous, and they defended the doctrine the best they knew how, in ways that we can't even fathom today. And so within the law of redemption, within one of these concepts that's prevalent throughout all of it, is that there is a Sabbath for everything. There's a Sabbath for labor, there's a Sabbath for the land, there's a Sabbath for debt, Sabbath for slavery, a Sabbath meaning that you have 6 of whatever the period is, 6 of a time frame, and in the 7th you are redeemed. And so you could be sold into servitude into slavery for 6 years, but in the 7th year, one of your tribesmen, one of your kinsmen, could redeem you out at any point during that 7th year. If you lost your land because you weren't able to pay the bills, or because whatever, you owed a debt somewhere else and you lost land that was your family's inheritance, it could be lost for 6 years, but in the 7th year, it was up for redemption. And then anyone that had the right of redemption could come in and redeem the land back to you. And so this is a prevalent concept that goes throughout the entire Levitical system, and it's essential to understand that their structure was built on this 6 and then 7. We took that a step further and said, I don't think it's a coincidence that there is about 6,000 years since Adam, if you follow the timeline that's given in Numbers and several other passages of, this person lived this many years and begat that person. There have been several studies that break that down, and however you do it, we're darn close to 6,000 years since that period, and the millennial reign is 1,000 years. So if we've established this time of 6 and 7, which I don't think it's just a coincidence, then we are following that pattern if the millennial reign happens during that 7 years. That's that 7th redemption, and that is the Sabbath, the rest. And so Christ calls himself the restitution of all things, the Sabbath of all things, the Sabbath of Sabbaths. And so I, again, think that is meaningful. So I added the verse here, but I think everyone had to memorize that one back in Awana, and so I won't go through it. But with that, the Book of Ruth is far more than a love story. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say the word love is only mentioned once, and it is only from Ruth to Naomi. And it is Boaz saying, your mother that you loveth. There is nothing in the text that mentions that Ruth loved Boaz. There are elements to it that are poetic. Yes, I'm not saying if you find inspiration, if that touches you in a certain way, that it's wrong, that there's not a homiletic application to this being a love story, but I can tell you that is not the point of the Book of Ruth. There is a far deeper significance to what's going on. So in just the highest level summary, Naomi is a Jew, Ruth is a Moabite, and so she is not of the house of Israel. But Naomi leaves the land in a famine, loses her land because of poverty and the death of her husband, and goes abroad. Her sons are married off to Moabite daughters. Ruth is one. Then her 2 sons, whose names mean weak and puny, die off, which I don't think is a coincidence either. So weak and puny die off and leaves Orpah and Naomi as the two daughter-in-laws. And they both love Naomi. Whatever the model is, it doesn't go into why, they are so enamored with, or they love her so much, but they put their own livelihood, because the husbands had died, they had the right and the ability under both the Jewish law and their local law to go out and remarry, but they didn't. They chose to stay with their mother-in-law. Naomi says, I need to go back to my people, but you should stay behind. I want you to stay to each of them. So Orpah and Ruth, you stay behind, get husbands, be safe, be secure. I don't want to be a burden on you, so I'm going back to my people. Orpah takes the opportunity, stays, and goes and collects a husband. Ruth says in one of the most quotable phases, where you go, I go, where you die, I die, and that's the meat behind the whole story. But Ruth is faithful to Naomi and returns to Israel with Naomi. They return impoverished, and so one of the rules, the welfare system in the state of Israel, is that if you owned a field, your gleaners or your harvesters were allowed to go through once, whether it was wine or whether it was grapes or wheat or barley or whatever you were growing, the harvesters were allowed to go through once and only once, and whatever was left for the poor. They were allowed to then go through behind the harvesters, and so that was the welfare system. The poor would follow behind the harvesters and be able to pick up whatever was missed, and that's how they provided for themselves. And so Ruth is gleaning in the field of a rich man named Boaz, and she has been out there a few days and catches the eye of the rich landowner named Boaz. Boaz finds her beautiful and instructs the harvesters to leave handfuls behind. Her mother, being savvy and understanding what's going on, Naomi says, hey, this is fishy. You brought home way too much. And so something's going on. Asked her what happens. She said, well, I met the master of the land, and he's instructed me to continue gleaning out here. And she says, ooh, what a coincidence. That's the land that was my family's land back to this tribe, and he is our kinsman. And so Naomi instructs her to take him up on the offer and kind of get close to him and basically take advantage of the gleaning. And then there's the scene, the thrashing floor of forget the name. Scott, you got it? No one? Okay, so the thrashing floor scene where everyone takes this as a sexual proposition, that he has gotten a little bit drunk. It says he's imbibed and had wine. It was a big celebration after the harvest where they would separate the wheat from the chaff, and then the master of the harvest would basically throw a big party and they would all sleep there. And so Naomi instructs Ruth to go and cuddle up next to him. And so Ruth does, and she takes his hem and places it over her. And everyone takes that as, you'll hear many sermons, books on that's a solicitation, that she's making herself available. There is far more scandalous than that. She's actually making a marriage proposal, which was inappropriate at the time. The hem, your authority, was placed in the hem of your garment. So when David sees Saul and sees him in the cave, he sneaks up to him and he cuts off the hem of his garment because it held your authority. It would have tassels and colors. Those tassels that we see on Jewish robes was the hem. And so when the woman who's suffering from loss of blood, who's perpetual loss of blood, she says, well, I know that if I can only touch the hem of your garment. To the Jews, that's like the rank and assembly. That's what a rabbi would have, a blue fringe on their hem. And so you knew it was a rabbi. And so that was like the authority. So when David cuts off Saul's, everyone knew who it was, because he would have been the only one that had a gold hem. And so that's the significance. She takes his hem, places it over her. So she is covering herself. It's a marriage proposal. So she's saying, I want to be covered with your authority. I am submitting to you. That is part of the wedding ceremony. If you're familiar with the Jewish wedding, that's one of the first things you do is you take the husband's hem and you place it over your feet. And so that's, I submit to your authority. And so it's a pretty well-known custom. If you're familiar with Jewish law, it's not sexual by nature, but then Boaz understands what's being propositioned, and he goes and he says, yeah, I would love to redeem. I would love to take you as a wife and redeem the land, but there is one closer. There's one, the nearer of kinsmen, so he has to approach the nearer of kinsmen and says, hey, Naomi's land is up for redemption, and would you like to redeem? And the nearer kinsman says, yes, absolutely, I'd love some more land. And Boaz says, by the way, you also have to redeem Ruth as a daughter. And he says, well, I can't do that because it would mar my inheritance. And so he gives him the shoe, passes the shoe, which is the sign of authority. He gives him his, and if you ever want to do a really crazy study, look up shoes in your concordance and just see all the various places it comes through. But gives him the shoe, which is basically a shame to him, but a rite of passage to Boaz. And so Boaz takes that, and that's his permission. He marries Ruth to redeem Ruth from her servitude, and he redeems Naomi's land back to Naomi. And so that is the story. That's the setting of all of it. And like I said, most common teaching is that this is because it's only 4 chapters in the Hebrew Bible and it's written in a poetic form, that most people take this to teach this as a poetic love story. But you'll see that it has so much to do with what's going on in Revelation 5 that it is virtually a commentary on it. If you just start, we always start with the names. That's one of my rules. Before I get into any story, before I get into any outlining, I try to understand, do whatever research I can to understand the names of the people at play. Naomi's name means pleasing, or the pleasing land. Pleasing place would be more appropriate. And she becomes a type of Israel in this story. Ruth's name means companion, or a faithful companion, depending on how it's pronounced. And she becomes a type of the faithful church. Boaz, his name is in his strength. And if you'll remember, we talked that a while ago that there are 2 pillars in the entrance to the temple, one in the promise to Thyatira. God says, I will make you a pillar to my name, in reference to the 2 pillars that stand in front of the temple that have names of Joachim and Boaz, one being in his redemption and in his strength, the first and second coming. And so Boaz is in the type of the kinsman redeemer. He's not even a type, he is the kinsman redeemer in this story, and his name means in his strength. Orpah means, Orpah leaves faithful, her name means the unfaithful. Did I even put that in here? Yeah, Orpah means unfaithful. And then the person who is in the field who actually introduces Ruth to Boaz is called the unnamed servant. If you do a study of any types, if you have someone in the role of an unnamed servant, they are always bringing someone to the person in the role of Christ. The unnamed servant is a type of Christ or a type of the Holy Spirit. And as Christ said, the Holy Spirit will never testify of itself. It testifies of me. And so in the Akedah, the offering of Isaac, we have right after they come down off the mountain, Isaac is edited out of the text. We don't see him again until an unnamed servant goes off to get a bride for Isaac and goes and brings Isaac back a Gentile bride. Isaac is a type of Christ in that story, and we've got an unnamed servant that goes out into the land to get a bride for Isaac. And then we give him the name at the end of it, after all of it's called him an unnamed servant 3 times, it gives him the name of Eliezer, which means the comforter. And so these are types that are consistent throughout. Anytime we see an unnamed servant, we see him in the type of Christ. So taking these through, you can see the story build out. You can kind of play the narrative in your mind, but it makes much more sense if you see this as a type of the Redeemer of redemption. Naomi's exile opens the door for the redemption of Ruth. The Jews' rejection of Christ allows for salvation, our salvation, opens the door to the Gentiles. Ruth's relationship with Boaz comes through Naomi. Christ is a Jew, and our relationship through him is through the Jews. Ruth learns of Boaz's ways and the requirements for redemption through Naomi. We learn of God and Christ through the Torah. Naomi meets Boaz personally through Ruth. The prophecy and Jewish apostles show us Christ. I won't go through these. We'll just keep them in your notes, but you can see that each of these elements of the story points to this role of the kinsman redeemer and the redeeming the land back to Naomi. She's not replacing. Ruth doesn't replace Naomi. The land is still redeemed back to her. Their redemption happens together. They are part of the same. Ruth is redeemed because Naomi is redeemed. Her kinsman is Boaz. Ruth is a Moabite. The only reason that Boaz has standing to marry Ruth when the nearer kinsman didn't, if you remember, Boaz's mother is Rahab the harlot. She is a Moabitess. So she was of that tribe, Jericho. So he, through grace, can marry a Gentile because he's a Jew by law, but he's able to show grace and take a Gentile bride when someone else couldn't. So it's just looking at it through this lens of Naomi, the role of Naomi as the rightful owner of the land, who brings her daughter, who brings the Gentile bride to marry for the Redeemer, and the Redeemer takes both the Gentile bride and the land into redemption. You can see that this ends up painting a pretty good picture of what's going on in the role of Israel and the church. And I can't do it justice in a couple minutes, but I really think it's worth getting into that study. Yep.
So when you said it was up for redemption, does that mean it was the 7th year? And so when she left the country and then came back, how did he get the land?
So it would have gone, so when she was impoverished, or when her husband was impoverished, he would have sold the land to somebody. And so the reason she returns is because her land is now coming up for redemption. She knows that after, whether it was 6 or 60, more likely 6, or it could have been like 3 sets of 6, every Sabbath, every 7th year is a Sabbath. So it wasn't necessarily the 7th year, it could have been the 21st year. So there are multiple Sabbaths. Does that make sense? So each,
she would have had to buy it back.
Yep, so she would have had to buy it back. So she needed someone with standing, and if you weren't able to do it, your next of kin could. So if you weren't able to buy yourself out of slavery, which no slave could because they didn't have any money, you could go to your next of kin and say, redeem me, pay the purchase price. If your land was forfeited for that same reason and you couldn't afford to buy it back, like Naomi, you could go to the next of kin and say, you have the money, will you buy it back and redeem it to us, to our family? And so Boaz purchased the land. He was now the owner, but it was redeemed back into the family. And because they had this tribe mentality, they were very deliberate and true to their tribes. If they owned it, the tribe owned it. And they didn't own land in this case at all. It was more like a tenancy. God owns the land. They were granted rights to it. So it's more like a lease that we think of. But that's the concept, whether it's debts or whether it's violations of law, whether it's the land. If you weren't able to, your next of kin was. And so that's the pattern that's being established. And so when we see Ruth in the role of the church and Naomi in the role of Israel, this saying that, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you, for wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me and more. Also, if anything but death parts you and I. If you see that as the relationship between the church and Israel, or the proper relationship between the church and Israel, it takes on a whole different color. It's not just the love of a daughter for the mother. There's far deeper significance to that, and I believe it's God calling us to have that faithful and loving relationship to his people. So that just to summarize these two roles, there's throughout the Israeli or Jewish legal system, like I said, there's no police. There is your kinsman, your tribe, your next of kin. That the closest person to you and relative has rights over you, has the obligation to protect you, has the ability to redeem that which was lost. If you lost your land, if you lost your freedom, if you lost your, if you committed a crime, that next of kin is called the kinsman redeemer, or in Hebrew, the goel. And we see this all throughout. There are many, many examples. There are 4 requirements for someone to be a goel. They must be the nearest of kin. If they are not the nearest in order by rank, they have to go to the next. and get the permission to do it. So whether it's avenging a crime or whether it's redeeming the land, it was a priority system. They must have the ability to redeem, they must be willing to redeem, and they must pay the purchase price in full. And those were the requirements for redemption. That is a model that we're going to see fulfilled. The part that we don't often focus on, and we can all see the correlation here between the Redeemer and Christ. He was the next of kin. He was a kinsman of Adam. There was a reason he had to be a man. He was able to redeem. He was the only person able to redeem because he was perfect. He had standing to redeem. He was willing to redeem. And he paid the price completely once and for all. So he was fulfilling this legal system and the law of redemption. I think most people are familiar with that correlation. The other side of the Goel, he was the kinsman redeemer and avenger of blood, is the way it's described over and over and over in Numbers and Deuteronomy. The kinsman redeemer and avenger of blood. If someone committed a crime against your family, if someone violated a law that hurt your family, if you committed blasphemy in the presence of your family, the kinsman redeemer was obligated to avenge that death, to right that wrong, to correct the error. That was an obligation that was their entire legal system. The reason they didn't have prisons or jails because that was a requirement. There were cities of refuge, which is a whole other study, that someone could flee to and escape the avenger of blood if they had standing. That's a whole other study that points to Christ. But that is the secondary role. This kinsman, your next of kin, has two aspects. Under the Levitical law, they are required, or they have the ability to redeem and to repurchase that which was lost, and they have the obligation to avenge that which was wrong. And so it's two sides of the same coin. One thing, yep, good. But one of the things that just puts a highlight on it to me is the Book of Ruth is what's read at the Feast of Shavuot. Remember, we talked about 3 fall feasts and 3 spring feasts, the 3 fall feasts pointing to the first coming of Christ, and each one of the feasts he fulfilled the element of the feast on the day in which they were celebrating. The spring feasts, the second set of feasts point to the second coming, the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Tabernacles, and he will fulfill each of those, specifically, I believe, on the day in which it is being celebrated. And then there's this one feast in the middle, which is the only one in which they use unleavened bread, and it has all kinds of, bread with leaven. They use leavened bread in that one feast, and there's all kinds of Gentile symbolism, and it's the Feast of Shavuot, and that is what they were celebrating on the day of Pentecost. And so at Pentecost, the Jews read the Book of Ruth. They don't know why they read Ruth on Shavuot. It has nothing to do with the Jewish system. They read it as like a love story, but I don't think it's a coincidence that we read the story of the kinsman redeemer on Pentecost every year. And so I think that's very symbolic and important when you talk about each one of these feasts. Every one of those feasts point to some aspect of Christ's ministry, and they are fulfilled on the day in which they are fulfilled. The one that tells that aspect of his mission is read on the day in which the church was born. So, with that background, it makes chapter 5 of Revelation, I believe, read fairly cleanly. So I'm gonna read through it, and then we'll do kind of more detailed breakdown like we've been doing in the last ones. But I'm actually gonna save the various songs of people in the second half of Revelation 5, and they kind of go with Revelation 6 and 9 as we're identifying some of these different people. So I won't include that tonight because I want to just focus on this part. But Revelation 5, and I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. Then I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals?" And no man in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or look at it. So I wept much, because no man was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look at it. But one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and loose its 7 seals." And I looked and beheld in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb as though it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. Then he came and took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. Now when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints, and they sang a new song, saying. And then we get into their song. But this is symbolism to its max. I mean, without understanding that this was rendered into signs, that this was meant for John to understand, this makes no sense. Being honest, on a reading of this, you can pick and choose well, I know who the Lamb is, and I know that there's seals that are going to be judgments, and generally you can just kind of sweep through this, but if you really stop and take a look at what's being said here, this is the climax of all human history. This is the moment, the crescendo of all of it, and it's meant to be this high point, and we even see it emphasized that everyone in heaven knows what's going on, including John. John doesn't ask, John doesn't have to be instructed. He sees what's happening, and it causes him, it says, I wept much, the Hebrew is, I sobbed convulsively. So he breaks down crying because he knows exactly what's going on. There is no explanation needed. He understands the context, and he understands what's at stake, and then when the answer is given that the Lamb, or the Lion of the tribe of Judah, is worthy to open the scroll and loose the seals, everyone in heaven falls on their face rejoicing. That is the crescendo of all human history. We are looking for one who is worthy to open this scroll and to loose the seals. They looked on heaven, in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and no man was found worthy. That's a pretty, I don't know if that's just poetic. I think it's literal. They looked everywhere. In heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and no one was found worthy, and so John sobs convulsively because he knows what's at stake. And then the angel says, fear not, John, the Lion of the tribe of Judah is worthy to open the scroll and loose the seals, and one steps forward. So there is something far deeper going on here just by the reaction of everyone around him. We have John sobbing when no one was found, and then when one is found, everyone, including John, falls on their face worshiping. That is, it's not just the standard holy, 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 the Lord God Almighty that's going round the clock. This is a reaction to what just happened. In order to better understand this whole concept, which of this scroll, specific to, I think, in my view, the reason that Jeremiah 32 was put into the text was to interpret this. But we'll read it here, and then I'll just kind of give my explanation after. For then the king of Babylon's army besieged Jerusalem. So Jeremiah is in prison in Jerusalem with Nebuchadnezzar's army. Nebuchadnezzar is the general under Nebuchadnezzar, and they are besieging Jerusalem. Jeremiah has been prophesying to don't fight back, don't rebel. Nebuchadnezzar is God's instrument. He's going to overthrow, and we'll all just get killed. And so he gets put into prison for being anti-patriotic, and he's sitting in prison, and it sets the scene for this. For then the king of Babylon's army besieged Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was shut up in the court of the prison, which was in the king of Judah's house. And Jeremiah said, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, behold, Hananiel, son of Shallum, thine uncle, shall come to thee, saying, buy thee my field that is in Anathon, for the right of redemption is thine to buy it. So Hanamel, mine uncle's son, came to me in the court of the prison, according to the word of the Lord, and said unto me, buy my field, I pray thee, that is in Anathoth, which is in the country of Benjamin. For the right of inheritance is thine, and the redemption is thine. Buy it for thyself. Then I knew it was the word of the Lord. So this is the same redemption we just talked about in Ruth. So Jeremiah is in prison. Anathoth knows who Jeremiah is, knows that he is the next of kin. He knows that he has the right of redemption. Anathoth isn't able to redeem his own land. He doesn't have the money to purchase it or whatever. He knows that Jeremiah does. So he sends his son and petitions Jeremiah and says, hey, we've got the opportunity. We're in this 7th year. We're in the year of redemption. Come buy our land back to the family. And Jeremiah has been prophesying for a year now not to resist Babylon. We're all going into captivity. quit fighting back, don't resist, we're all going into captivity. But the word of the Lord comes to him and says, hey, your cousin is going to come to you and say, your uncle's land is up for redemption. I want you to buy it. And the reason he wants him to buy it is to show to the people that we're going to come back, that you're going to be restored to the land. It's supposed to be this whole process is a message of hope to the people, and Jeremiah is doing it very publicly. And I bought the field. I bought the field of Hanamel, my uncle's son, that was in Anathoth, and weighed him the money, even 17 shekels of silver. And I subscribed the evidence and sealed it, and took witness, and weighed him the money in the balances. So I took the evidence of the purchase, both that which was sealed according to the law and custom, and that which is open, and I gave the evidence of the purchase to Baruch, the son of Neriah, and the son of Messiah, in the sight of Hanamel, my uncle's son, and in the presence of the witnesses that subscribed the book of the purchase before all the Jews that sat in the court of the prison. And I charged Baruch before them, saying, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, take these evidences, this evidence of the purchase, both which is sealed, and this evidence which is opened, and put them in an earthen vessel, that they may continue many days. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, houses in the fields and vineyards shall be possessed again in this land. So, what Jeremiah says is take these instruments. There are two instruments. There's one that's open, that anyone can open and read, that says Jeremiah is the owner of this land, he's entitled to open it. Then there is one that is sealed, that only someone with the right of redemption can break the seal. How do you know who has the right of redemption? It is written on the outside. There's a specific type of document. These are all written on papyrus, and that's the paper of the day. It was pounded flat. The outside had ridges. The inside was smooth. And so you only wrote on the outside if it was necessary. They weren't normally written on the front and the back. But if you had instructions on what it took to open those, you would write that on the outside, and it's called an anathai, which is a legal document essentially, and that's how it was sealed and conveyed messages. So if you were to send a message, I wanted to send Beth a message, I'm the king of wherever, she's the queen of wherever, and I wanted to send her a personal message, I would seal it with my seal, and I would write on the outside what it took to break that seal. And she would have to present her credentials to break the seal. And anyone who read the outside would know who has the credentials, that only Beth of this kingdom can open this seal. And so that's the reason you write on the outside. It's not normally written within and without. The outside is not smooth like we think of our normal paper. And so that's a normal practice. It's in Numbers. It's several different references throughout the Bible, but this being the most graphic, that he took and sealed it, and there would have been instructions on the outside saying who was able to redeem the land, who was able to break those seals and prove their own ownership. He puts them in a vessel and buries it, and probably gives instructions to his family members on where to find it, so that in 70 years, when they return to the land, they can dig up this vessel and prove, hey, that's Jeremiah's land, it stays in our family. That was the whole purpose. It was a message of hope. And it also ties to the 70th week of Daniel, in that we catch Daniel, he realizes he's in captivity, and he realizes the 70 years is about to expire, and that's when we see him go to prayer and start praying, and the angel Gabriel comes and visits him. And so he took Jeremiah literally, that it was going to be 70 years of captivity. And so in that 70th year, he goes to prayer, and we get our 70th week of Daniel prophecy in Daniel 9. So that's the background on what we're looking at, and that's what John understood. He knew exactly what this scroll that was sealed, it was written on the outside and sealed. John knew what we are looking at. So we just went through that. What's it mean to be written on within and without? That's what establishes who is able to open it. No man in heaven and earth. Ish is the Hebrew word, and it's man. You'll see some of your translations say no one, but ish is specific to man, not man as in gender specific, but man as in a son of Adam, who's Ish. Adam is the name is significant of man. Of man is Adam. And so no man in heaven and earth or under the earth. It had to be a man. It had to be a kinsman of Adam. Adam had forfeited the title to the earth. He was given. God gave him title to the earth. He turned it over. And God says that in Genesis 1, that it was given unto him. He was to have dominion. He was to multiply on the face of the earth. But he forfeited title to Satan. So then, when Christ is tempted in the wilderness and Satan comes to him and says, one of the temptations, what's that? Yeah, no. One of the temptations is you don't need to go through all of this. Just worship me, and I will give you the kingdoms of this world, for they are mine to give. Christ doesn't say, no, they're not. They're God's. They are not God's. They have been given over to Satan. He is called the king of this world. He's called the prince of this world, the ruler of this world. In various ways, this has been forfeited over to him. It is in his possession. It is awaiting redemption. We are in the period where it has been forfeited. It says we are in slavery. In every which way, it says the earth is in this 6-year period of being forfeited over to him. And so this redemption that's occurring requires a kinsman of Adam, his near kinsman, must come and redeem the land back to God. And so John understands the transaction that he's seeing. There is a title deed that only a kinsman of Adam, only a man who is worthy, who meets the requirements that are written on the outside, can redeem this title, can start breaking these seals, which starts the process of redemption. And when no one is found worthy, John understands the implication that the world will continue in servitude for either another 6,000 years or indefinite. He is a good Jew. He knows his Jeremiah, and he knows what this is about. And he knows that if no one is worthy to loose the scroll, or to loose the seals and read the scroll, it stays in that period for another set of 6. And so he sobs convulsively. But the angel says to him, don't weep, John. There is one that's worthy. There is a man that's worthy. And he looks and sees the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Notice throughout the entire book to this point, we've used exclusively Gentile references. They've all referred back to Revelation 1, 2, or 3, the titles that Christ gives to himself. This is the first Jewish title we see used of Christ, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And that's a reference back to Genesis 49, which is the first messianic prophecy that when Judah is given his name, that you will be a lion's whelp, and that's worthwhile study in itself. The root of David, we went through that. That's Isaiah 11:1. These are Jewish titles that pointed to the Messiah, that the Messiah of Israel is worthy. Fear not, John, the Messiah of Israel is worthy to redeem the earth. But this is the dichotomy. So the Lion of the tribe of Judah is worthy to loose the scroll, but John looks, and what does he see? A lamb as it had been slaughtered. There is a disconnect there, right? There's a disconnect that was so big that the Jews, even being just absolutely dedicated to the Torah and the scripture, missed the Messiah. All of these references, they were looking for the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Over 1,300 references to Christ coming in conquest and to conquer, to take title, and a few references to him coming to be sacrificed. Like I want to say it's 1 to every 100 references to him coming as a sacrificial lamb. And so their expectation, they expected the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but when the lamb came, that was the sacrifice, that was the Passover lamb, they didn't recognize him. So John was told the Lion of the tribe of Judah is worthy to loose the scrolls, but what he looks and sees is the lamb as it has been slain, who actually takes the scroll and looses the seals. But this lamb has 7 horns and 7 eyes. 7 horns is easy. Horns are used throughout the entire Bible as a symbol of power. They're symbolic of having an authority. A horn blast was the symbol of someone's authority in war. But horns are going to be used all throughout this text to refer to someone's authority. Having 7 horns, or having 7 heads, or 10 heads with 7 horns. So having all power and 7 eyes, which is, it clarifies, which is the 7 spirits. So full of the Holy Spirit and all power, the Lamb comes forward to loose the scroll and to loose the seals and read the scroll, which is the title deed of the earth that is up for redemption. So that sets the scene for what's going to happen the rest of the book. Now we start seeing, as each of these seals is broken, that some cataclysm happens on earth. I believe that is symbolic of the judgments to come. I think as he's breaking these seals, it lets forth the judgments that bring about this redemption into him, into his name. But the purpose of this is by breaking each of these seals, he is laying claim to what was already purchased. When he died on the cross, he purchased back that which was forfeited to Satan. It is now his. He has redeemed it, but it has not been collected. We do not see the world in a redeemed state. It has been redeemed. Do you see redemption going on around you? Has the world been restored to its, pre-fall condition? No. Yet we constantly talk about we have been redeemed. We've been redeemed, yet there's something missing. Something hasn't happened, right? We can all acknowledge we're not in a redeemed world, and we will be. And so when we use this term, redemption, first of all, I think a lot of the background behind it is you have to acknowledge in order to redeem anything, it has to be lost. You can't redeem something you already have. You cannot redeem something that's yours. Redemption requires that it was first turned over or forfeited or someone else has possession. So we have to acknowledge that we are in a fallen world and in a fallen state in need of redemption. And that's something I think the church fails at over and over and over is we preach the good news without preaching the bad news. We preach salvation, salvation, salvation without ever preaching that you are in need of salvation and here's why. You are desperately wicked. You are by your nature evil until redeemed. So I think that's kind of this concept that we've been trying to hammer out week after week and how it presents itself in the Bible of our need for Christ, establishing and admitting that you have a problem is the first step on the road to recovery. And I don't think we can start talking about the good news and salvation until we fully apprehend and accept the bad news, that we are so desperately in need of him. And then the redemption becomes the miraculous thing that it is. But there's two aspects of redemption that you have to recognize going on here. Otherwise, all of this gets a little bit convoluted. Christ has a dual mission. We can all recognize that there are two comings and two objectives in those comings. He has a dual mission and there is a dual redemption. There is a redemption of our souls. We are redeemed. We can speak of ourselves being in Christ as being redeemed. We are currently redeemed, and we are being redeemed day after day and renewed in our redemption. But there is a coming redemption when Paul talks about as we eagerly and earnestly look forward to the redemption of our body, but not just us, all of creation will be redeemed. There is a coming redemption that is all-encompassing. So speaking of he has redeemed us, yes, absolutely, I agree with you. But we are not in our redeemed state. We are still struggling with sin. We are still individually not fully delivered from the presence of sin. We will be. We've been delivered from the power and the penalty of sin. We will be delivered from the presence of sin. And the entire world will be redeemed. All of creation groans and travails looking for the redemption that is coming. And so that is what is happening in the book of Revelation. It is this final redemption. We have seen the past redemption. We are a product of the past redemption. We are looking forward to the future redemption, the completion of our redemption, and at the same time, the redemption of all things. As you recognize, every aspect of Christ's ministry has a dual nature. There is this kinsman redeemer. His first coming, he came as the kinsman redeemer to be the Passover lamb, to be the sacrifice, to pay the price. But it is not complete. We do not see his work right now in a completed state. Our redemption, the price for our redemption has been paid. The sacrifice, he has done everything necessary. He has not come and collected what is his. And that is what we're talking about when we get into the book of Revelation. We have seen the lamb that has been slain. We will see the lion of the tribe of Judah. We have seen the suffering servant. We will see the conquering king. It's all of it is a dual fulfillment. That's from cover to cover. The Bible tells us this story of two missions of the Redeemer. And I guess, like we talked about, that's why the Jews missed their Messiah. They were wanting to get to the second part. They were excited to see the conquering king. And they saw the lion or the lamb that had to be sacrificed first. And so when he comes back and they ask him he asked who John the Baptist is, and they said, was John the Baptist Elijah? And he said, well, if you had believed, it could be, but you would not. You chose not to. He was prepared for that second role. It could have been if they had believed, but they did not, and so he had to suffer. Not that he didn't know that was going to happen, but from a prophetic standpoint, he has 2 missions. He fulfilled one in his first coming. He will fulfill the second in his second coming, and that is the entire book of Revelation that we're talking about. The completion of his work, the glorification of him, the final retribution for 2,000 years of rejection, scorn, persecution. He is a vengeful and jealous God, and he is coming back to fulfill that later part of his mission. And the fear of God should be just as alive today as it was in the Old Testament, and yet we kind of fixate on the current aspect of our redemption, not looking for the fulfillment of it and the implications of that on the non-believers. That should be a terrifying thing. Yep.
I noticed in Revelation 10:7, the last trumpet, that the mystery of God is finished. I'm not sure what that means.
So there's a lot of different commentaries. And the mystery of the Old Testament, or that which was hidden from the beginning, that John had, or Paul had the privilege of revealing. He keeps calling it the mystery of God throughout the epistles. He's referring to the church. That the church was this mystery. It was that salvation could come to the Gentiles without having to convert to Judaism. That the Holy Spirit would indwell and live amongst us. That was his great privilege to be able to announce, was that God had made a way that was different and new, and that was the thing which had been hidden from the foundations of the earth. And so I tend to see that when it's at the last trump, that the mystery of God will be fulfilled, that's the last unknown. That the church was not revealed in the Old Testament, but his work in the church is completed. But I'm not sure I don't have a strong feeling on that.
You're using the word fulfillment, and in the King James it uses finished, but there was another passage that what you said reminded me, and it's not that verse, I can wait. Thank you. Matthew 23:23. Jesus is speaking to the religious leaders, and he said that you pay attention to the titles with the herbs, etc., but you should have paid attention to the weightier matters of the law, which are judgment, mercy, and faith. And I know that in the Old Testament, God says, will he find faith in the earth? In Jesus, it says, he wonders when he returns, will he find faith in the earth? Okay, so, and Jesus said he came to fulfill the law, and that was before his death. And I believe that God would fulfill his law in that Jesus is God, even after his resurrection. The weightier matters of the law are judgment, mercy, and faith. And I'm trying to understand Revelation with regard to those three. Because I'm wondering, in all that's shown, Jesus said, I have yet many things to say unto you, but you cannot bear them now. Howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, so it's like from Pentecost on,
Yep.
he will guide you into all truth, and he will show you things to come.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe as we can bear it, and that's why it's not fully revealed. We have a partial picture today.
Yep.
I don't know, maybe
What-
more
But
tomorrow.
it does say, if you ask, he will show you all things.
Yeah.
Well, you have emphasized that it's the revelation of Jesus. The book of revelation, the purpose is to show us him. Now Job said, I have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you, and I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. So to see Jesus, we also see ourselves.
Yep, and Paul says we see now we see as in a mirror, or as in a mirror partially, but then we will see you as you are. And I do believe.
We see our sin when we see him.
Yep, I think all of these end up being. That's why I believe it was signified, because I think we're kind of getting glimpses. I think all of these are like our finite minds couldn't comprehend the full picture, but we're getting glimpses as in partially through a mirror. But then we'll know the full truth. I don't necessarily think that this is everything there is to know about God, like the full revelation of God. I think it's the revelation of what we need to know for our purposes. Is that? I guess I'm missing that.
Well, I was just thinking that we're holding the timing of his coming.
Yeah.
The precise day and the precise hour, which makes it very clear we do not know.
Mm-hmm.
What does that say about us? What would we do if we knew? Is he saving us from ourselves?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, absolutely. Because we probably just live the way we want to until 10 minutes before, and then
We've seen
repent.
interesting scenarios when people say they knew the day and the hour, and they get busy with many things.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen then.
Now you can buy their books fairly cheaply at any used bookstore. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I'm not sure. I don't know if there's a full answer, or if there's any possible way of. I think we're kind of just all of this is dealing in like pursuit. Like, will you pursue me? What do you want to like? Here's what I want you to know about me, and I see each of them as not that we could possibly apprehend who he is, or even a percentage of what there is to know about him, but that the honor of it is in the seeking. That he's given us these glimpses to give us the opportunity to pursue him. Like, he could have made this crystal clear so that there's no pursuit, right? He could have written this book in a way that a child could read it and know everything there is to know about him. But I believe it's the glory of God to conceal things and the privilege of kings to seek them out. That he intentionally renders this into some coded signs, that allow us to year after year throughout our whole lives just continue to seek him and continue to try to. And so I don't find any argument with anyone who sees something different in the text where there's ambiguity, because they're just a fellow seeker alongside me, and God honors their seeking the same way he honors someone who finds. And so that's at least my thought on all of it, is why that's the reason why it's cryptic, for lack of a better word.
Seeking God means you can do with all your heart.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want it to be.
And if your intellect is this big and you pour all your heart into it and you never find anything, he's going to honor it the exact same that if your intellect is gigantic and you find all the answers, you'll have the same standing before him, because he cares about the seeking. He wants the heart. He wants
The heart in Hebrew, right, though, is the center of all your thought, all your feeling, all your emotion, all your decision making. So I think he's saying, if that's in Jeremiah, right? So that's Hebrew. So it's not just your emotions. He's saying, you better come after me with everything you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just saying from an understanding standpoint. There's thousands of other aspects of your relationship, but just from a mulling over and understanding and praying to Spirit to reveal. He's not going to reveal the same amount, the same things, the same. To whom much is given, much will be expected. And I love that. I think that's just consistent with everything we know about him. Is that he wants to be pursued.
Right.
He wants to be pursued in every single way. And so he's made it a little bit foggy. He could have made it very clear. Christ, in fact, says that's the purpose of parables. He speaks in parables so that you will understand and they will not.
It's the glory of kings. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and the glory of kings to search the matter out.
Yep. Absolutely.
One verse, also I have pondered, and I think it's in Revelation, where he says, I hate those curse with blood. Our violence against one another, our violence against him, that makes it necessary for him to create a new heaven and new earth.
Yeah, no, I whether it's destroyers in the like actual physical killing sense, or destroyers of the earth and those who have destroyed, souls, who have led them away. I think it's all of it. I think he the condition of the earth is intentional, and it's our choosing, and that's what this whole thing is about. That's why there's this violent retribution. He's not passive about it. He doesn't say like, the condition of the earth saddens me, and therefore I will come back and, correct your ways. He's coming back in wholesale slaughter, and it is a violent response to a violent result. We have chosen violence both in our, our doctrine, in our actions, whether it's physical, and I
Well, we
think,
talked about that before the flood, for his reason for bringing the flood, because of the violence.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna finish up here because I'm one slide away from getting it under time, and Sam's getting tired.
No.
So, yes, I did it in an hour and 26 minutes. So, I'll stop we can finish on any chat anyone wants to have on it, but I just wanted, for the coming week and here on out, it's kind of going to move a lot quicker. Like, we've been spending a full week on, 8-9 verses, but we'll try to deal with each of the cataclysms to come, talk about what's going on in the heavenly picture when it talks about the sealed judgments. What are each of them? Read the passage, but not going to dissect the potential implications of each, whether a meteor is a literal meteor or whether it's a, figurative. We might mention a couple of those, but you can.
Wormwood coming down.
Yeah, exactly. An actual, it gives it a name, and so it might have some significance. Like, we'll mention those things and talk about how it plays into the book of Joshua. Ends up being a prophetic layout of the book of Revelation, and we can kind of overlap those two. You've got, it's even named after Yeshua, and you've got a usurper, or a conqueror, a Messiah, a deliverer coming to restore the land from the usurpers. And we see the various aspects of it seem to parallel the aspects of Revelation, even so much as the king of the enemy is Adonai Zedek, the Lord of righteousness, which is a title of the Antichrist, the false Messiah. And we see the enemies of God crying under the hills and asking the rocks to fall on them to hide them from the face of the destroyer. We see the exact same thing. They're prophetic parallels that this book of Joshua is very intentionally structured. And so we'll go through and kind of talk about that. But in general, we won't get into huge in-depth studies on, what natural phenomenon might be resulting in, causing this, and the different speculations on the waters turn to blood. Well, near pass-by of Mars could cause solar dust, and you'll see people get off on long studies on that. I don't find that hugely valuable, because I could care less what phenomenon God uses to bring about his judgments. I believe that he means what he says and says what he means, and that he's going to bring about the judgment. And if he has to walk down here himself and put his finger in and turn it to blood, I don't really care, or if he uses the natural phenomenon. So I don't put too much credence in those, but I am interested in the why is the water turned to blood? What's the significance of water turning to blood? Why is it why is it the judgments that happen, the 7 seals, and the different judgments seem to parallel some of the judgments that are happening in Exodus? And like, how does that tie to a judgment of God's versus a judgment of man, and stuff like that? So spend more time on the why than the what, but there's a lot of interesting content out there on the what, and a lot of speculation on how some of these things might come to pass, but that's not really of that much interest to me, so I kind of skip through it a bit. But we will start moving through a lot quicker, and if we were to keep on pace, the study of Revelation would take like 2.5 years, and I don't plan to do that. So I think we'll get through the rest of the book by the end of the school year, just moving at a couple chapters a night from here on out. So Will you stop? Thank you.